The storm had rumbled all night, shaking the windows of the little countryside house where Masha sat alone with the old chest of drawers that had just been delivered from her late grandmother's estate. Her husband Sergei had refused to help unload it. In fact, he had laughed when he saw the scratched, faded wood and the broken handles dangling loosely from the drawers. This chest of drawers should only be put in a museum, he sneered, wiping his hands clean after finishing his beer. What kind of inheritance is this, old rubbish? Honestly, Masha, your grandmother must have run out of things to give you. His laughter echoed in her ears long after he left the room. Masha stood silently, running her hand over the worn surface. It was true, the chest was ugly by most people's standards. The varnish had long peeled away, one leg was uneven, and there was a faint smell of dust trapped in the wood. But to Masha, this piece carried more weight than Sergei could ever understand. It wasn't just furniture. It was history, memory, bloodline. Her grandmother had whispered on her deathbed, "Take care of it, Masha. It holds more than you think." Those words had kept Masha awake for weeks. She hadn't dared to tell Sergei because she knew exactly what he would do. Sell it, or worse, burn it for firewood in one of his drunken moods. That night, after Sergei had gone to bed snoring heavily, Masha lit a small lamp and knelt by the chest. She pulled open the top drawer. It groaned like an old man complaining about his bones. Inside lay folded linens yellowed with age, the kind her grandmother had stitched by hand. Beneath them she found letters tied with a faded ribbon. Her heart skipped. She reached in, untying them carefully. The letters were addressed to her grandmother from a man named Nikolai, written during the war. They spoke of sacrifice, courage, hunger, and undone. Masha's eyes blurred with tears as she read line after line of pain mixed with hope. She remembered her grandmother's stories of her grandfather, how he never came back from the front, leaving her to raise her children alone. These letters were pieces of a soul preserved in ink. She closed the drawer quickly when she heard Sergei stir in the next room. If he caught her reading them, he would mock her again, call it a romantic nonsense. But Masha's heart had already awakened to something. This chest wasn't just wooden nails. It was a vessel of strength, of survival, of lessons hidden in time. The next morning, Sergei came into the kitchen, grumbling about the lack of coffee. He saw the chest still standing proudly in the corner and sneered again. "You really plan to keep that junk?" he asked. "We could sell it for firewood at best. Who wants this old trash?" Kept quiet, serving him tea instead. She had learned that silence was sometimes the best shield against his ridicule. But inside, something burned, a seed of determination that hadn't existed before. As days passed, Masha began spending more time with the chest. She discovered in the second drawer a collection of hand-sewn garments, patched and repatched, yet preserved with care. Each piece told a story of poverty, resilience, and dignity. In the third drawer she found photographs, sepia faces staring back at her with pride and sorrow. Generations of women who had endured hardships, but carried themselves with grace. One evening, while Sergei was out drinking with friends, Masha pulled out the bottom drawer. It was heavy, resisting her pull as though it didn't want to reveal its secrets. With one final tug, it came loose. Inside, hidden beneath a false wooden panel, she found a small leather-bound journal. Her grandmother's handwriting. Masha's hands trembled as she opened the first page. "To my granddaughter Masha, if you are reading this, then I am gone. Do not be afraid of struggle, my dear. Struggle is what made me. Inside this chest you will find not only memories, but lessons. Use them and you will never be poor. Value them and you will never be weak. Remember, everything you need to build your future is already inside you." Tears rolled down Masha's cheeks. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of strength. She had been living under Sergei's shadow for so long, always doubting herself, always bending to his mockery. But her grandmother's words reminded her that she came from a line of strong women who survived wars, famine, and loss. What was Sergei's laughter compared to that? The next weeks were not easy. Sergei continued to belittle her, calling her useless, telling her she was lucky he even kept her around. He laughed whenever he saw her polishing the chest or reading from the journal. One day you'll realize that thing has no gold, no money, nothing practical, he scoffed. You'll waste your life on fairy tales. But Masha didn't care. She read the journal every night. Each page revealed wisdom on perseverance, on discipline, on dignity. She began to see her grandmother not as a fragile old woman, but as a warrior who had faced the worst of life and still kept her soul intact. And slowly, Masha began to change. She started waking earlier, using her mornings to embroider cloth like her grandmother once had. She began selling small pieces at the local market, at first just enough to cover her bus fare, but soon she noticed people admired the craftsmanship. Orders began trickling in. Sergei didn't notice at first. He was too busy with his drinking and complaining, but when he did, he mocked her again. "You think you're some kind of businesswoman now?" he laughed. "Stitching old rags and selling them to fools? Don't waste your time, Masha. No one gets rich with needles and thread." But Masha kept going. Because each time she wanted to give up, she opened her grandmother's journal and found words that seemed to speak directly to her heart. "The world will laugh, my dear. But let them laugh. A seed knows what it will become long before anyone else does." Then came the turning point. One evening, Sergei returned home drunker than usual. He stumbled into the house and in his clumsy rage knocked over the lamp that stood near the chest. The oil spilled, flames licking dangerously close to the wood. "Oh no!" Masha screamed, rushing to push the chest away. She burned her hand slightly in the process, but managed to save it before the fire spread. When the flames were put out, Sergei shouted at her. "Are you mad? You risk your life for that junk. It's just wood." But Masha stood tall, her voice steady for the first time in years. "You know, Sergei, it's not just wood, it's my heritage. It's my strength, and it's worth more than your laughter, more than your mockery, more than your empty words." He blinked, shocked. Never before had Masha spoken to him like that. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Sergei muttered something under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door. Masha sat down beside the chest, tears of both pain and pride rolling down her cheeks. She realized then, this wasn't just about an old piece of furniture. This was about her reclaiming her voice, her dignity, her future. The morning after Sergei's outburst, Masha awoke with sore hands wrapped in bandages. The burns stung, but her heart burned brighter. For the first time in years, she had stood up to him. She had chosen us. She had chosen her grandmother's voice over her husband's laughter. When she came into the kitchen, Sergei was sitting with his usual scowl, nursing a hangover. He looked at her bandaged hands, then at the chest standing untouched in the corner. "You're mad, you know that," he said flatly. "Risking your skin for that antique rubbish. You'll regret it." Masha didn't reply. Instead, she boiled water for tea, poured him a cup, and then quietly sat with her own. Inside, though, she whispered to herself, "No, Sergei. The only regret would be listening to you for the rest of my life." In the following weeks, her determination grew sharper. Every night after finishing her chores, she opened the chest and read more of the journal. Each page was like a lantern in the dark. When they tell you you're weak, prove your strength not with words, but with persistence. When they laugh, let their laughter be the music to your silent work. And never measure yourself by what you own. Measure yourself by what you create. Those words wrapped around her heart like armor. Her embroidery work blossomed. At the local market, women admired not just her skill, but the stories behind her design. Masha began to sew symbols inspired by the letters she had read. The dove of peace from her grandfather's war letters, the wheat stalks of survival from her grandmother's tales of famine, the intricate roses that symbolized love in hard times. Customers didn't just buy cloth, they bought a piece of a soul. Word spread quickly. Soon she was receiving requests not only from market-goers, but from a small boutique in the city. They wanted her designs on scarves, tablecloths, even dresses. Masha's days grew fuller, her nights shorter. But she didn't complain. Each stitch was an act of defiance against the years Sergei had crushed her spirit. Sergei, however, grew restless. He noticed the extra money appearing in the household. He noticed the way people greeted Masha with respect at the market. And instead of pride, jealousy gnawed at him. "Don't get too excited. he muttered one evening as she carefully folded freshly embroidered cloths. "It's just a fad. They'll get bored of your little designs soon. Then what? You'll come crawling back realizing I was right." But Masha didn't crawl anymore. She smiled gently, not with mockery but with quiet strength. "Maybe," she said softly. "But even if they stop buying tomorrow, at least I know I tried. At least I know I built something with my own hands." Her calmness enraged him more than any argument could. One Sunday, while Sergei was away with his drinking companions, Masha invited 2 women from the boutique to her home. They wanted to discuss a larger order. She served them tea and biscuits while they admired her work. "This isn't just embroidery," one of them said, running her fingers along the delicate threads. "This is art. It carries a story." Masha's heart swelled. She felt her grandmother's presence in the room, proud and watchful. As they finalized the order, Masha excused herself and opened the chest once more. She wanted to show them something. From the bottom drawer, she pulled a piece of unfinished embroidery her grandmother had started decades ago. The cloth was old, the threads faded, but the design was breathtaking, a field of wheat under a rising sun. The women gasped. "This is extraordinary. You should finish it. It could be your signature piece." Masha held the cloth gently, tears in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." But the moment Sergei came home and saw the women leaving, his temper exploded. "What's this? You're inviting strangers into our house now? Showing off your silly sewing as if you're some kind of queen?" "They're customers, Sergei," she replied calmly. "They want to buy more work." He laughed harshly. Customers? You talk like you run a business. You're still the same useless wife who depends on me." Masha stood taller. "I don't depend on you anymore, Sergei. Not for money, not for approval, not for anything." His eyes darkened. For a moment she feared he might strike her. But instead he threw his empty bottle against the wall and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Masha's hands trembled, but she didn't collapse. She walked straight to the chest, opened the journal, and read the next words. "There will be days when they try to break you with anger. Do not meet fire with fire. Meet it with stone, strong, unmoving. Silent until their flames die out." She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She knew then. She had chosen a new path, and there was no turning back. The following months tested her resilience. Sergei grew colder, often disappearing for nights, returning drunk and bitter. But instead of crumbling, Masha grew stronger. Her embroidery business flourished. The boutique placed larger orders, and soon another shop in Moscow contacted her after seeing photos online. Masha could hardly believe it. She who once thought she was worthless now had people from across the country admiring her work. Each night she whispered to the chest, "Thank you, Babushka. Your gift saved me." And the chest still had more to reveal. One evening, as she polished its wood, her hand brushed against a small notch on the side. Curious, she pressed it, and to her astonishment, a hidden compartment clicked open. Inside lay a velvet pouch. Her breath caught as she untied it. Inside were several gold coins, old and gleaming faintly, even in the dim light. Alongside them lay a folded note. "For when you are ready, my child, not for survival, but for growth. Use this not to escape hardship, but to build something greater." Masha's knees gave way. She sat on the floor, clutching the pouch to her chest. Her grandmother had not only left her wisdom, but also the seed of opportunity. That night she made a decision. She would no longer limit herself to selling at markets and boutiques. She would open her own small workshop, a place where other women could work, where stories could be stitched into cloth, where the chest of drawers would stand as a symbol of heritage and resilience. It terrified her, but it also thrilled her. And when Sergei laughed again, calling her a delusional and a dreaming too big, she didn't shrink. The winter wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside Masha's little house there was warmth and light. Spools of colored thread, stacks of fabric, and finished embroidery pieces covered every surface. The chest of drawers stood proudly in the corner, polished and glowing faintly in the lamplight, like a silent guardian. The pouch of gold coins lay safely hidden inside, but Masha had already decided how she would use them. She would invest in her own workshop. It wouldn't be grand at first. just a rented room in the center of town where she could display her work, take larger orders, and perhaps even teach others. Her hands shook when she first inquired about the rental price. It was more money than she ever dared to imagine spending. Sergei, upon overhearing, exploded with laughter. "A workshop? You," he jeered, his breath thick with alcohol. "You can't even run this house properly, and you think you can run a business? You'll waste every coin and then you'll come begging me for help." Masha felt the sting of his words, but she remembered the journal. She opened it that night and found, "If you want to silence doubt, don't argue. Build. The results will speak louder than your words ever could," so she pressed on. The first day of the workshop opening, Masha stood outside the modest little building she had rented. Her palms were sweaty, her heart racing, but when she unlocked the door, she felt as though she was unlocking a new life. She arranged her embroidered cloths, framed some of her grandmother's unfinished pieces, and placed the chest of drawers in the corner like a centerpiece. To her, it wasn't just storage, it was a shrine of strength. Customers came slowly at first, curious neighbors and passers-by. Some bought small pieces, others just admired the work. But by the end of the first month, orders began to pile in. A local newspaper even ran a feature about other woman who stitches stories, highlighting her heritage and the way she turned old traditions into modern art. For the first time in years, Masha walked through the town with her head held high. People greeted her warmly, children pointed and said, "That's the embroidery lady." She felt alive, but Sergei grew darker with every success she achieved. He came home one evening angrier than usual. "So now you're some kind of celebrity, eh? Everyone praising you while I sit here forgotten? You think you're better than me now?" "No," Masha replied gently. "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I'm just doing what I love." Her calmness infuriated him further. He slammed his fist on the table. "You've changed, Masha, and not for the better." But deep down, she knew she had changed. For the better, for her future. One stormy night, Sergei's bitterness spilled into action. He staggered into the workshop after closing hours, drunk and raging. "You think this place makes you important?" he shouted, kicking over a chair. "Well, let's see how important you feel when it's gone." Masha's heart pounded as he stumbled toward the chest of drawers. He gripped its edge as if ready to topple it. "No," she cried, rushing forward. Her body blocked him, her voice rising with a strength she didn't know she had. "You will not touch it, Sergei. This chest is worth more than your anger, more than your bitterness, more than every cruel word you've ever spoken." For a moment he froze, stunned by her ferocity. Then, muttering curses, he shoved past her and stormed out into the rain. Masha collapsed into a chair, trembling. She realized then that Sergei wasn't just trying to destroy her chest. He was trying to destroy the strength it gave her. But he had failed. She placed her hands on the chest, whispering, "I won't let him win, babushka, I won't." The next morning, Masha found the courage to confide in her customers. She didn't speak of Sergei's violence directly, but she told them of the struggle, of how people often laugh at dreams, of how persistence is the only answer. Her honesty resonated deeply. Soon, women from the town began visiting her workshop not just to buy, but to learn. They asked her to teach them embroidery, to share her grandmother's patterns, to pass on the legacy. And so Masha's workshop became more than a shop. It became a gathering place, a school, a sanctuary. Women laughed together, stitched together, and shared stories of their own hardships. The room buzzed with warmth and resilience. Masha looked around one evening and thought, "This is what my grandmother meant. The chest wasn't just for me, it was for all of us." Then one quiet evening, as she polished the chest, she discovered yet another hidden compartment. This time it revealed a folded parchment wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from time. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a map, hand-drawn, old but clear. It marked the land just outside the village where her grandmother had once lived. On the back was a note, "This land was ours. It is still yours. I could not keep it in my time, but perhaps in yours it will bloom again. Plant, my dear. Build. Make it alive." Masha gasped. The inheritance was not just wisdom, not just coins, it was land. A piece of earth waiting for her hands. That night she could hardly sleep. The vision of a bigger future filled her mind. A workshop on that land, surrounded by fields of wheat and flowers, a place where women could work freely, where children could learn, where her grandmother's spirit would live on forever. When she told Sergei, his laughter was cruel. A land? What will you do? Plow it yourself? You'll collapse before you plant a single seed. Sell it, Masha. Sell it for cash while you still can. At least then it will be useful. But Masha shook her head firmly. No, I will not sell it, I will make it grow. And for the first time, she didn't care about his opinion. She no longer lived by his approval. The next weeks were filled with planning. With the help of her new friends from the workshop, she visited the land. It was overgrown, wild, forgotten. But to Masha's eyes, it was beautiful. She knelt, scooped a handful of soil and whispered, "We will build something here." Her heart swelled with purpose. She would not only expand her embroidery workshop, she would create a center, a place where tradition, strength, and creativity could thrive. Her grandmother's chest of drawers had led her step by step, unlocking not only secrets but her own courage. And as soon as Masha made that vow on the soil of her grandmother's land, she knew her life had crossed a point of no return. There was no going back to silence, no going back to dependence. The land her grandmother left had once been farmland, rich with wheat that fed entire families. Now it lay abandoned, swallowed by weeds and silence. But to Masha, it was not ruin, it was potential. On a cool spring morning, she stood on the edge of the field, the chest of drawers key dangling on a ribbon around her neck. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice in the breeze. "A plant, my dear. Build. Make it alive." She had no plow, no tractor, no experience in farming. But she had something stronger, faith and determination. At first, she began small. She and a few of the women from her workshop cleared a patch of land. They planted wildflowers and vegetables. Children ran through the fields laughing, their voices carrying like bells. The earth responded to their care. Within weeks, sprouts broke through the soil. Masha watched them grow with the same pride she once felt when her first embroidery sold. This land, like her own life, had been mocked, neglected, and called useless, but with patience it was proving its worth. Sergei, however, grew more venomous. He sneered at her efforts. "You think you're a farmer now? This is a joke, Masha. A joke. The neighbors laugh at you behind your back." But Masha had learned something powerful. Laughter is often the mask of envy. She no longer flinched at ridicule. Instead, she smiled and said, "Let them laugh. I'll keep planting." Her calm infuriated. He drank more, stayed away longer, and when he did come home, he only spewed bitterness. His words had once pierced her heart, but now they sounded hollow. For every cruel thing he said, Masha remembered her grandmother's journal. When people try to break you, understand, it is not you they hate. It is the mirror you hold up to their wasted lives. And so she pitied Sergei more than she feared him. The breakthrough came one summer morning when a group of city investors visited the village. They had read about Masha's embroidery workshop and were curious about her newer creative farm. She welcomed them with tea, bread, and stories. She showed them how the women embroidered while children played in the fields. She explained her vision, a cultural center where heritage met the future, where crafts and farming sustained not only bodies but souls. The investors were impressed. One of them said, "This is more than a business. This is a movement. We would like to support you." Masha's hands shook as she signed her first partnership agreement. With their help, she expanded the land into a community project, gardens, workshops, and even a small stage for storytelling and music. The chest of drawers was placed at the entrance of the new center, not as furniture but as a symbol. Visitors touched it as though it carried magic. To Masha it did. It carried generations of strength. Sergei, meanwhile, could no longer deny her success. People in town whispered about him, not as a provider, but as the man who had mocked the woman who became great. His pride could not bear it. One night he confronted her in their home. "You've humiliated me," he spat. "Everyone respects you and I'm nothing now. You've turned them against me." Masha looked at him, not with anger but with clarity. "I didn't turn them against you, Sergei. You did that yourself. You chose bitterness instead of growth. You chose laughter instead of faith. He clenched his fist, trembling with rage, but she stood tall, unafraid. "I won't live like this anymore," she continued. "I won't let your misery chain me down. Tomorrow, I'm moving to the land. That's where my future is. You can come if you wish to change, but if not, I will go on without you." While words landed like stones in water, rippling through the silence. Sergei had no reply. He turned away, defeated by the very strength he had tried to crush. The next day, Masha moved into a small house built beside her grandmother's land. She carried the chest of drawers with her, placing it near the window where sunlight could warm its aged wood. Her workshop grew into a thriving center. Women earned money, children learned skills, families found hope. Visitors from across the country came to see the place where stories are stitched into life. Masha became a leader, not because she sought power, but because she embodied resilience. Years later, she stood before a gathering of young women eager to learn. She told them her story. "My husband once laughed at this chest of drawers," she said, her hand resting on the wood. "He called it junk, but inside it were letters, journals, and wisdom that changed my life. At first I thought the inheritance was wood and nails, but I was wrong. The true inheritance was strength, courage, and belief." The women listened with wide eyes. Some wiped away tears. Masha smiled. "So remember this, people will laugh at your dreams. They will call them useless. They will call you useless, but laughter cannot stop growth. Mockery cannot stop destiny. The only thing that can stop you is your own doubt. Don't let it win." And so the chest that should only be put in a museum became the centerpiece of a legacy. Sergei faded into obscurity, swallowed by his own bitterness. But Masha flourished, remembered not only as a skilled embroiderer, but as the woman who turned ridicule into strength, who turned an old chest into a symbol of hope, who planted courage into the soil of her grandmother's land, and watched it grow into a forest of dreams. Her story traveled far, inspiring countless others. And whenever someone asked how she did it, she would smile softly and say, "I listened to the voice that believed in me, not the voice that laughed at me."